So here you have Martin Scorsese squaring off with Marvel's head honcho, Kevin Feige, a la Captain America versus Iron Man. Instead of civil war, it's essentially cinema war. Get it? This battle royale of cinema giants pretty much represents the existential crisis of Hollywood right now. Scorsese believes Marvel movies are just glorified theme park rides, and Feige doesn't feel the industry gives Marvel or comic book movies in general any respect. Especially for coming in like saving the day when no one was going to the cinema. Remember that time? Who's right? Who's wrong? I say both are wrong. Hear me out. I'm going to get into it in this video essay, so stick around. In the beginning of human civilization, in the days of the caveman, you had a campfire, and everyone would gather around the fire to keep warm and hear the stories from the elders. Epic stories of how they were chased by woolly mammoths or saber-toothed tigers, whatever. But whatever the story was, it was important that it was told in front of the fire. The truths that the tribe had accumulated and were passing down in story form. The fire was the excuse for everyone to gather around to warm themselves up to hear a great story. But what happened if you now use that analogy to apply to the greatest fire of storytelling we've ever experienced, which is Hollywood and the cinema screen? Is that the fire has now become the spectacle. A spectacle drawing the attention away from the story, at least according to Scorsese. More on that in a second. The reality is, from the beginnings of Hollywood, the idea of moving pictures was already novel. And no matter what film snubs would want to say, cinema was considered lowbrow in the beginnings. It was seen as the poor man's relation to theatre. But one thing's for sure, it definitely has been the universal modern campfire drawing everyone to hear the stories being told. But is the fire now burning down the multiplex? Martin Scorsese's argument is essentially that Marvel films are glorified amusement rides, taking away resources from real movies, and they're oversaturating the market. He blames them for the decline in cinema attendance, quality, and the respectability of the industry, almost suggesting a dumbing down of the enterprise of cinema and moviegoing. Kevin Feige, CEO of Marvel Studios, his argument, though not directed at Scorsese, talks more about his lament at the Hollywood elite who have long overlooked comic book movies, Marvel in particular, looking down on them, turning their nose to them, ignoring them during Oscar season and any kind of major awards, frequently disrespecting the storytelling and the quality of the genre. Feige believes that his movies at Marvel should get recognition and respect. We have seen a glimpse of what that recognition looks like with the response to the Black Panther movies, particularly the recent Black Panther Wakanda Forever, with the Oscar nomination for its supporting actress, Angela Bassett. It could also be argued from Feige's perspective that movies coming from the MCU have actually saved the film industry with their huge mega box office success, generating billions in revenue and keeping the industry afloat globally during lean times. However, indirectly, Feige would pop shot at people like Bob Chapek, the recent head of Disney after Bob Iger's retirement, before Iger's recent return to that position of CEO, who famously ramped up the company's streaming bias, going head-to-head with Netflix with all of its new content geared to Disney+. More of that later. And of course, dipping his hand in the production of the Marvel Studios output, possibly to blame for its significant dip in quality. With regards to both Scorsese and Feige, again being the figureheads of this existential question of traditional Hollywood versus the IP/superhero factory, the real grown-up cinema of Scorsese versus the amusement ride version of Marvel Studios, You could argue that one man is looking for more presence, funding, prestige, and market share, whilst the other more recognition, and to quote the late Aretha, RESPECT, respect. Both represent the question of identity crisis regarding what modern cinema is supposed to be and what the current problem is. Okay, that's their beef. Maybe to understand where they're coming from, we need to go back to their origin stories, to coin a comic book phrase. The truth is, both Scorsese and Feige have been underdogs in the Hollywood movie system at one time. Obviously, very different eras, but both were the David to their Hollywood Goliath. They were both outsiders who became disruptors of the status quo against all odds. The tale of two Roberts.
You talking to me?
Is very poignant that the symbolism of the Davids of both Scorsese's movie career and Feige and the MCU's is that their genres, their movements and their successes were both spearheaded by a talented actor named Robert D. Back in the 70s, long before I was born, Martin Scorsese's first breakthrough movie, 1973's Mean Streets, starring, among other actors, a young Robert De Niro, made its mark. But no one would dispute or argue against the fact that his 1976 movie was the one that broke him in officially and cemented him into the Hollywood landscape to great critical and box office acclaim. That little movie was Taxi Driver. Talking to me? Starring in the lead role, yep, Robert De Niro, fresh off the heels of The Godfather Part 2, and would forever be associated with both the actor and director as a seminal movie of the 1970s. That movie, with its bleak portrayal of Travis Bickle, a veteran of the divisive Vietnam War, reintegrating himself into the filthy, gritty New York streets as a taxi driver, giving commentary on the darkness of the city and its inhabitants, whilst himself being essentially a ticking time bomb waiting to go off in a violent and explosive manner. Taxi Driver, to this day, is studied by film students everywhere and is seen as one of the most important movies in Hollywood history. Scorsese and De Niro would collaborate many times and are one of the most famous and celebrated collaborative teams in movie history. In the era that Martin Scorsese came up, the Hollywood studios were very rigid and stiff. As an Italian-American, Scorsese knew what it was like to be a minority and wanted to explore his heritage and experience on the big screen, adding his stories to the cultural landscape. He was part of the new wave movement of auteur-type filmmakers, such as director of The Godfather, Francis Ford Coppola, William Friedkin, director of The Exorcist, Brian De Palma, who would direct movies such as Carrie, the more populist director Steven Spielberg with Jaws, and George Lucas with American Graffiti, before he'd go on to make a little indie film. They were his circle, and though they had made significant inroads into Hollywood in the 70s, the old guard still ran the studio systems and were still very much in control. So Scorsese was one of these disruptors, bringing in a unique auteur style, arguably of all of them the most graphic, the most gritty, the most street level and working man style movies when you consider Mean Streets and Taxi Driver. Fast forward to the late 2000s to the other Robert D. Robert Downey Jr. was a star long before the MCU, but a faded star due to personal problems that we won't go into in this video. He had many ups and downs. One of the biggest ups was receiving an Oscar nomination for his titular role in the 1992 Charlie Chaplin biopic. But by 2008, the year that Iron Man debuted, directed by actor-director Jon Favreau, the second of the newly launched Marvel Studios films after The Incredible Hulk, Downey's career was, let's just say, not shining bright. An interesting tidbit is that the biggest star signed to the movie at the time was Terrence Howard, who allegedly was considered at one time for the role of Tony Stark, but was cast instead as best friend James War Machine Rhodey Rhodes, and was even paid higher than lead Robert Downey Jr. Favreau had to fight for his lead and had to find special insurance to hire him because of the actor's personal woes, and that the partner studio didn't want anything to do with him. So to say that the movie was a roll of the dice was a massive understatement. There had been superhero movies that had various levels of success before the MCU, such as Warner Brothers' Batman movies, and even Marvel via license to 20th Century Fox's X-Men trilogy. They ran the gamut of hit and miss, at least until Christopher Nolan's Batman movies, with the second film released a few months after Iron Man. But as we all know, Iron Man would be a game changer. Scorsese's rise and undeniable legacy gives him a credible perspective on the industry as a whole. Scorsese's very much a cinephile, somebody who not only loves cinema, but preserves old movies on his own dime and really lives for the art form. At the same time, Kevin Feige, also a big fan of movies and of Scorsese, believes in the magical experience of movies for the audience and had long seen the potential of comic books being added to the many different genres on the big screen, having worked with Fox to bring the previous X-Men movies from page to screen. Feige was excited to jump at the chance to bring Marvel's extensive back catalogue of characters and stories to the big screen in a way true to the comics, fulfilling Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's wildest dreams. And just as well, because Marvel had an awful time in the cinema with their early attempts in the 80s with Howard the Duck, with only a slight glimmer of hope in the late 90s with the Blade franchise starring Wesley Snipes in 1998. The fact that Blade, an obscure character, more vampire than superhero, was a huge hit gave some glimmer of hope that a production based on Marvel's comics could be anything but a laughingstock. Especially when you consider the 1994 late B-movie director Roger Corman produced attempt at the Fantastic Four. That movie has gone down in legend as being so bad they never even released it. And Avi Arad, who was CEO of Marvel at the time, comics and toys, wrote a big fat check to make sure that movie disappeared. Except it didn't, because it got leaked and received mythic cult status. So the first anomaly that went against the tide of really bad comic book movies, specifically Marvel, because you did have success with the Batman movies, was Blade. The second anomaly came in 2002 with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, a movie long in development hell. Why was that movie beyond successful at the box office? Number one, Spider-Man is arguably the most popular comic book character of all time, certainly giving Batman and Superman a run for his money at rival studio DC. But it has been thought that the reason why Spider-Man 2002 was such a huge success is that it came after very tragic circumstances, that being September 11th, 2001, the attack on the World Trade Center. It is thought that America, as well as the rest of the world, needed an inspiring, universal monomyth to believe in heroes and stories of heroism at such a dark and tragic time. It's reminiscent of what happened in 1977 with the release of Star Wars, which was juxtaposed with not only a very gritty landscape of cinema, again, movies such as Taxi Driver, but also a very downbeat and cynical 1970s that was coming out of the bleak swamps of political events like Watergate and the Vietnam War. That film's simple tale of good versus evil was very much needed back then and was arguably very much needed in 2002. But the pivotal year for the comic book movie coming of age and getting some kind of traction is again the year 2008. However, the most anticipated movie of that year, let alone comic-based one, was The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan's Batman sequel to Batman Begins. You see, Batman Begins was a big success against all the odds. Nobody cared about it in the run-up to its release because of the abysmal last Batman movie, Batman and Robin, with George Clooney and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Considered so bad, people thought the business of Bat movies was bankrupt forever. Batman Begins came out and was a pleasant surprise, to say the least. The Dark Knight built upon that movie and took it to a whole nother level. Not only commercial success, but critical, and re-established the Batman cinematically as valuable IP, garnering significant cultural impact, showcasing a stellar performance by the late great Heath Ledger as the Joker. 2 major blockbuster successes in 1 year, both comic book movies with casts that would normally appear in any major mainstream Hollywood movie. What was going on in Tinseltown? Why does this matter? Well, they were the new major Hollywood disruptors. At the time, more aligned to Goliath was Martin Scorsese, with his films representing the norm in Hollywood, both for critics, box office success, and critical Oscar-level acclaim. His 2006 crime drama, The Departed, epitomizes this, released 2 years earlier to great acclaim, box office success, and finally landing the director that much coveted prize, Best Picture and Best Director Academy Awards in 2007, considered long overdue by many in the industry. That film paired Scorsese with Leonardo DiCaprio, soon becoming the 21st century winning combination of director and actor, the same way with De Niro throughout the 70s to the 90s. Such bankable Hollywood movies were unexpectedly challenged by unlikely comic book director Christopher Nolan with The Dark Knight. The cerebral and very artistic Nolan's films would join Scorsese in award discussions and nominations. This was the first time in Hollywood history that comic book movies were recognized at the Oscars for top-tier categories, going on to win a Best Supporting Actor Oscar posthumously for the late Heath Ledger. Marvel wasn't left out in the cold though, receiving 2 Academy Award noms for sound and visual effects, not winning either, but the enormous box office success and critical praise surely softened the blow, securing a new film studio's future and became a massive cultural game changer in the process. To say Iron Man ignited cinemas and completely built the Marvel Cinematic Universe on Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau's shoulders would be an understatement. The secret weapon was the movie's cast. Other than Downey, it comprised of actors that would traditionally be found in Oscar-nominated fare, such as Terrence Howard, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Jeff Bridges. Real, legit Hollywood names playing it straight in a comic book film. Martin Scorsese and his movies were now very much part of the establishment and no longer could be seen as disruptors or he an underdog. Could this be part of Scorsese's slight resentment at the Marvel machine? Bruised ego? No longer the voice for the regular Joe audience member? Who knows? But what is definitely concrete is this was a huge Hollywood shift. The business called show had moved into a different direction. I would put it as the law of ROI, return of investment, which became far more important to film studios in Hollywood than ever before, as more and more studios got bought by big conglomerates and ran by accountants less interested in the mere matter of storytelling. Scorsese and Marvel, headed by Kevin Feige, have both contributed a much-needed shake-up to the film industry. In their different way, even though they're at different ends of the palette and the spectrum, I'm going to suggest that neither of them are the real enemy or cause of the decline in the cinema-going experience, even though they both, if we're honest, have contributed in their own small way. So if neither of them are the bad guy, the enemy, the antagonist, then who is?
Coming soon.